let's talk about hemoglobin. We said hemoglobin is going to carry oxygen. When hemoglobin is attached to oxygen, we call it oxyhemoglobin. There's some other terminology that you may need to know. If hemoglobin doesn't have oxygen, we call it deoxyhemoglobin. Hemoglobin also can carry CO2, and that is called carbaminohemoglobin. Sometimes CO attaches to hemoglobin. In that case, we call it carboxyhemoglobin. Of course, this can be very dangerous. There's a very small amount of CO in our body, and hemoglobin can take care of that one. But more than that, it's going to become toxic. When you look at one hemoglobin, you can see your hemoglobin is composed of two parts, heme and globin. Globin is composed of 4 polypeptides. The most common one is alpha 1, alpha 2, beta 1, and beta 2. Each of these polypeptides is attached to one heme. So therefore, one hemoglobin has 4 hemes. One heme attached to one polypeptide. But what is heme? Let's take a look at this heme. We're going to take the heme out. We want to see what it is. Your heme is composed of 2 things. A ring is called porphyrin, and in the middle we have iron. This iron is ferrous, Fe2+, not Fe3+. Fe3+ is called ferric, and each iron carries 1 oxygen. Therefore, one hemoglobin carries 4 oxygens. The amount of hemoglobin that we have in our blood is somewhere between 12 to 16 or 17 gram per deciliter. This is how much hemoglobin we have in our blood. If you change this polypeptide from alpha 1, alpha 2, beta 1, beta 2 to a different type of polypeptide, the affinity of oxygen for this hemoglobin changes. For instance, a fetus has hemoglobin but is not alpha 1, alpha 2, beta 1, and beta 2. A fetus has alpha 1, alpha 2, gamma 1, gamma 2. We call it hemoglobin F for fetus, and hemoglobin F has much higher affinity for oxygen than this one, which is hemoglobin A. Hemoglobin A, which is alpha 1, alpha 2, beta 1, beta 2, create over 97% of our hemoglobin. 2% of hemoglobin that we have in our blood is alpha 1, alpha 2, delta 1, delta 2. That is called hemoglobin A2. And 1% contains hemoglobin F, which is alpha 1, alpha 2, gamma 1, and gamma 2. We also have some faulty hemoglobin, for instance, hemoglobin S. Hemoglobin S, or sickle cell hemoglobin, is a hemoglobin that the beta chain at the position 6 replaces valine for glutamic acid. And that is going to make your hemoglobin to fold inappropriately and as a result cannot carry oxygen. You're going to learn about those faulty hemoglobin in pathology later. So now, let's talk about iron, because clearly to make hemoglobin, we have to have iron. Lack of iron creates iron deficiency anemia. If you don't have iron, then you cannot create hemoglobin, and if you don't have enough hemoglobin, you cannot carry oxygen, and that is called anemia. Iron not only is used by hemoglobin, but is very essential for the function of every cell, because we use iron in cytochrome. Remember cytochrome A, cytochrome C. Those are the cytochromes that we found in every mitochondria for burning ATP. And every cell has mitochondria. That means every cell needs iron to create cytochrome. Iron must be transported by a protein. It's called transferrin. Iron in the form of ionized or inorganic without attaching to transferrin would be very damaging and very toxic. Therefore, your body make sure that excess amount of iron is being stored. However, the storage has capacity. Anything more than that is going to deposit in different organs and it's going to damage the organs. I'm not sure if you heard the word hemochromatosis. Hemochromatosis is another name for iron overload. Very dangerous. Again, you're going to learn that one in the pathology. You may ask, why not dumping extra iron out of our body? The answer is, we don't have any physiologic way to excrete iron out of our body. So therefore, extra iron will be deposited in our organs and is going to create damage to our organs. What's the storage of iron in our body? The most important storage is called ferritin, and the second storage is called hemosiderin. Ferritin and hemosiderin are two storage. Ferritin is a spherical shaped protein with the hollow space. Inside this hollow space, you can store up to 4,500 molecules of ferric. The beauty of ferritin is the iron inside the ferritin is readily available to the bone marrow to produce RBC. And also ferritin is water soluble. We store ferritin mainly in the bone marrow, liver, and spleen. Inside the bone marrow cell, inside the liver cell, and inside the cells of a spleen, we have a vesicle. It's called cytosome, and cytosome contains ferritin. If ferritin doesn't contain iron, we call that ferritin apoferritin. Hemosiderin, on the other hand, is an aggregate of carbohydrate, protein, and iron. 50% of the weight of hemosiderin comes from iron. Hemosiderin, as opposed to ferritin, is insoluble in the water, and you can find it in the macrophages of bone marrow and liver cell. Hemosiderin is formed by partial destruction of the ferritin. You may ask, how? Well, the answer is, when the amount of iron inside the cells increases, and ferritin has so much iron and completely being loaded, lysosome doesn't like it. Lysosome is going to come and degrade this ferritin into particles. Those particles forms hemosiderin. Therefore, you don't have hemosiderin when your iron level is low. You only create hemosiderin when your iron level is higher than normal. So therefore, I would say at the lower cellular iron, ferritin will be predominant. When you have a higher cellular iron, then hemosiderin would be predominant. The problem with hemosiderin is the iron that is in hemosiderin is not readily available to bone marrow to create RBC. This table compares ferritin to hemosiderin as we discussed. Majority of the iron that we use in our body is due to recycling of the red blood cell. When the red blood cell dies, the iron inside the hemoglobin will be released and we can use it. That is 80% of the iron that we need. So that means we need to get some iron through our food for making sure we have enough iron to create hemoglobin or create cytochromes. So therefore, as part of our diet, we have to get some irons, and we have to absorb the iron from the GI system and bring it to the blood. So let's talk about this iron. We have two different types of iron in our food. One is called heme iron. Those are the iron that we eat when we eat red meat. Remember we said before that red meat is red because it has myoglobin. And myoglobin, we said, carries oxygen. That means they have iron also. So when you eat red meat, you are taking some iron inside the heme, inside the myoglobin. Those iron are ferrous iron and readily can be absorbed. So they can come to your GI system and you can absorb it very easily. However, there are some irons that we eat through vegetable or through whole grain, and those irons that you get from vegetable or whole grain, they are ferric iron. They are Fe3+. Fe3+ cannot be absorbed easily. Therefore, we have to do some changes on it. Let's take a look and see how it works. Let's say here is the lumen of your GI system. Here's the food, and here is going to be the blood. So we want to bring iron from here to the cells of your small intestine and then bring it to the blood. We said the heme iron, the one that you get from red meat, easily pass through the cell membrane is going to come in. Remember, irons are ions, and ion cannot pass through the cell membrane. We need a channel. For heme iron, we have a heme transporter and iron can come in. However, for ferric, we said the story is different. To bring ferric inside the cell, first we have to change ferric to ferrous. Thanks to cytochrome B at the wall of duodenum, it's called D-cytochrome B, D for duodenum, that is gonna reduce Fe3+ to Fe2+. Fe2+ now can be absorbed, but again, is an ion, we need a channel. The channel is called DMT1, divalent metal transporter 1. Fe2+ or ferrous is gonna pass through this DMT1, is gonna come inside the cell. Now, what we're going to do this ferrous? We can store it as a form of ferritin inside the enterocyte, inside the cell, or we can release it from the cell inside the blood. And again, to pass ferrous through the cell membrane, we need a channel. The channel in the basal layer, where it's facing the blood, is called ferroportin. Ferroportin is a channel that allows iron to come inside the blood. However, remember, to carry iron with transferrin, we have to change it to ferric. ferric is the one that can attach to transferrin, not ferrous. Therefore, attached to this ferroportin, we have hephaestin. Hephaestin is a protein that is going to oxidize ferrous to ferric again, and now ferric can attach to transferrin and can be transported inside the blood. What is going to happen to ferritin inside the cell? Well, this ferritin is going to stay inside the cell, and as you know, many times you shed the cells of your small intestine inside the lumen, and as a result, you're losing this iron that is inside the cell. So this iron can end up to your feces because if you shed these cells, you're going to get rid of this ferritin. Another name for ferroportin is called IREG1 or iron regulated transporter 1. Then what you're going to do with this iron which is transferred by transferrin? This is transferrin, TF, and this is the iron. Remember, iron is attached to transferrin for transfer inside the blood. What you're going to do with this iron? Well, you can bring this iron inside the different cells. In this picture, it shows one macrophage. To bring iron inside the cell, you need a receptor, and the receptor is called transferrin receptor, TFR. Transferrin receptor is not by itself. It's always attached to two other different molecules. One is called beta-2 microglobulin, and the other one is called HFE. For the sake of this argument, we are not going to go through this one because it's going to be beyond the scope of this class, but all I want you to know is to bring Fe inside any cells, in this case is macrophage, we need a receptor for transferrin. Now, Fe is going to come inside the cell. If I need iron in the future, we have to get this iron out. Again, we have ferroportin, but remember, inside the cell, this ferric changed to ferrous, and if you want to release it in the blood, you have to change it back again to ferric. This is Fe3+. This is Fe2+. When you release it, remember you have to release it as Fe3+. How are we going to change Fe2+ to Fe3+? We are going to use another oxidase, and that's called ceruloplasmin. So remember, in the case of enterocyte, is hephaestin. In the case of macrophage and other cells is CP or ceruloplasmin. We're going to talk about this part later. This picture shows and summarizes what we talked about. So here's my irons that we eat through red meat or through vegetable or whole grain. Is going to come inside the duodenum, and duodenum is a place that you're going to absorb them. As you can see, it's going to come inside the cells of the duodenum, and then inside the cell we can store iron as ferritin, or we can dump it inside the blood. Inside the blood is going to attach to transferrin. We can take this transferrin to any cells, or we can take it to liver and spleen for storage as a ferritin or hydroxysteroid, and if we need it, we can take it to the bone marrow to create new red blood cells, and these red blood cells can come back to the blood and can be carried. The last thing that I'd like to talk about the iron metabolism before we end this one is about a very important protein. It's called hepcidin. Hepcidin is made by liver. Hepcidin is the protein that regulates the amount of iron. How much iron do we have to absorb from the small intestine? Every iron we eat? So someone needs to regulate, because again, iron can be very toxic if you absorb too much. So therefore, we have a protein called hepcidin that is going to regulate our iron absorption and release. When the iron goes up, hepcidin is going to attach to ferroportin and degrade and destroy this ferroportin. As a result, you cannot absorb iron through the small intestine. That's the single most important function for hepcidin. But also hepcidin can go to the macrophage and hepatocyte and also retain the iron inside those cells and prevent ferroportin to release the iron inside the blood. So most importantly, hepcidin is going to work on the small intestine, but also can work on the macrophages and hepatocyte to make sure this iron is going to stay inside the cell and is not released. After learning about iron and metabolism of iron, let's talk about what is going to happen when the RBC gets old. Remember, RBC after 120 days is going to get old and is going to die. So what is going to happen to this RBC? Well, RBC after 120 days is going to lose its elasticity. Remember, elasticity of RBC is super important because RBC must pass through very tiny capillary inside the spleen, liver, and bone marrow. Those three organs, they have the smallest size of capillary. The most important among those three, of course, is the spleen. The capillary inside the spleen is smaller than the size of RBC. In other words, if RBC wants to pass through the capillary inside the spleen, they have to squeeze themselves through the capillary. Let's take a look at this picture. Look at this one. The RBC is completely getting flattened here. Why is that? Because the diameter of the capillary is smaller than the diameter of the RBC. For RBC to go through this tiny capillary, we have to squeeze RBC. And if RBC doesn't have elasticity, it's going to rupture. So therefore, old RBC, they're going to break down inside the liver, bone marrow, and specifically the spleen, because they cannot go through the capillary, and macrophage that you have inside the spleen or liver and bone marrow come and get this old RBC and destroy them. Therefore, the RBC will be destroyed outside the blood vessels by the macrophages. Therefore, it's called extravascular hemolysis, breaking down the RBC outside the vessel. So what is going to happen to this RBC when it's taken by macrophages? As you can see in this picture, that was our macrophage. The old RBC is going to be phagocytized, and macrophage is going to get this RBC, and it's going to break down this RBC. By breaking RBC, you're going to release hemoglobin, and heme is going to be released by heme oxygenase. When you release heme, then you can remove iron, and you know the rest of the story about iron. What is going to happen to globin? We said globin is polypeptide, so we can recycle globin into amino acid and you can reuse it to build new globin. What is going to happen to porphyrin ring? The porphyrin ring is the one that's going to cause trouble. The iron is out and porphyrin ring needs to be taken care of. How are we going to take care of the porphyrin ring? Let's take a look at this picture. This is your macrophage, and here's the RBC, old RBC that came in. We broke down this RBC, released globin, and we recycled the amino acid. We took the heme out and we recycled the iron, and we transferred iron by transfer inside the blood, and what is left is a porphyrin ring. So what we're going to do with porphyrin ring? We're going to change porphyrin ring first to a pigment that's called biliverdin. Inside the macrophage, biliverdin is going to change to bilirubin. This bilirubin is not water soluble. Bilirubin is going to attach to albumin, and albumin is going to bring bilirubin into liver. Bilirubin cannot be inside the water by itself because it's not water soluble. This bilirubin, which is not water soluble, is called indirect bilirubin, or is called unconjugated bilirubin. Liver is going to conjugate this bilirubin. It's going to make it water soluble. That is called a direct bilirubin. After conjugation of bilirubin, bilirubin is going to end up to the bile, and every time it releases bile, bilirubin also is going to come inside the small intestine with bile. Bilirubin inside the small intestine is going to move to large intestine. Inside the large intestine, we have a bunch of bacteria. This bacteria is going to break down this bilirubin and change it to another pigment that's called urobilinogen. Majority of urobilinogen is going to stay inside the large intestine, and it's going to turn into stercobilin, and stercobilin is going to give the color of the feces. However, 20% of this urobilinogen is going to pass through the wall of large intestine and is going to get to the blood, and inside the blood is going to get oxidized and it's going to turn into urobilin. Urobilin is a pigment that's going to give the color of the urine. This diagram is going to summarize what we talked about. Macrophage is going to get the RBC and it's going to break down hemoglobin into heme and globin. Globin is an amino acid, can be reused. Heme is going to release porphyrin and iron. I forgot to mention that when you break down porphyrin to biliverdin, you also release some carbon monoxide that can be taken care of by lung. The rest of the story is the same I mentioned before. Biliverdin changed to bilirubin. Bilirubin attached to albumin. This bilirubin is called unconjugated, or it's called indirect. It's going to come to the liver. Liver is going to conjugate this one and turn it to direct bilirubin. Direct bilirubin is going to get to the bile duct and is going to enter to the small intestine. In the large intestine, urobilinogen is going to change to stercobilin and gives the color of the stool. Some is going to get inside the blood and it's going to turn into urobilin, and that is going to give the color of the urine. That is going to bring us to the white blood cell. White blood cells are used for defense mechanism. They're going to help you to fight. If there's any infection or germ outside, these white blood cells that can leave the capillary and come outside. Like an amoeba is going to squeeze through this wall of capillary. This process of leaving the capillary, coming outside, is called diapedesis. Diapedesis is a process of leaving capillary and coming out. As we mentioned before, we have 5 different types of white blood cells. 2 of them are agranulocyte and 3 of them they are granulocytes. And that is going to bring us to the platelet. Another name for platelet is thrombocyte. Platelet, yes, is used for blood clotting, but you will see in the next recording that is more than only blood clotting. You don't create clot in a daily basis. So what is the function of platelet when you are not creating clot? You will see platelet has more function than creating clot for your blood. But for now, I want you to understand that platelets are derived from a big cell inside the bone marrow. It's called megakaryocyte. This large cell has multiple nuclei and creates between 1,000 to 3,000 platelets for us. The way it works is when you pinch off a piece of this large cell or megakaryocyte, each piece is called a platelet. When you have a big cell like this or megakaryocyte, you can create between 1,000 to 3,000 platelets. Therefore, we say platelet is not a cell. Platelet is a fragment of a cell. It's called megakaryocyte. Platelet only is going to stay functional in the blood for between 5 to 9 days or around a week. And the last thing I'd like to mention about platelet is platelet, yes, is inside the blood, but 1/3 of total platelet that we have is inside the spleen. As a result, if someone does not have spleen in his or her body, this platelet is going to stay inside the blood vessels, cannot be stored in the spleen, and therefore your total amount of platelet in the blood goes up. And that is going to bring us to the end of this recording.